Hello and welcome. What happens when Australia's human rights referee, the Human Rights Commission, decides speech itself is the problem? Today we examine who gets to set the boundaries of debate on climate and what happens when dissent not only persists but intensifies, and why attempts to police misinformation are backfiring so spectacularly. This episode is an editorial. It's my analysis and opinion rooted in publicly reported events and contested debates. As always, I encourage you to check widely, cross-check claims and decide for yourself. I should mention at the outset my own disagreeable encounters with this venal institution that brutally obstructed human rights throughout the entirety of the COVID terrorism. Accordingly, I despise the loathsomely hypocritical globalist shills in their institutionalised satanic inversion of purpose. But back to the question at the heart of it. When institutions tasked with protecting rights start proposing rules that curb speech, is that safeguarding truth or obstructing it? The Australian Human Rights Commission has positioned itself in the national conversation about misinformation and disinformation, particularly on climate. It posits that we need guardrails to stop harmful falsehoods, but evermore argue those labels are used too often and too loosely to sideline dissenting science, policy criticism and inconvenient facts. Let's be clear about the stakes. A rule that sounds neutral, stop misinformation, is only as fair as the people who get to define the word misinformation. And definitions in practice are fluid. They shift with political winds, bureaucratic initiatives, and what's fashionable in certain circles of power. If you think this is just about bad tweets and sloppy Facebook posts, think bigger. When the state deputises itself or its agencies to decide what can be said on complex, evolving scientific and economic questions, we're not in the realm of moderation. We're inveigled into censorship, hidden behind the slippery language of safety. Critics point to cases like that of former Professor Peter Reid as emblematic. Reid publicly challenged aspects of the narrative around the Great Barrier Reef, questioned methodological rigour in parts of the field, and paid a steep professional price. Whether you agree with him or not, the message others heard was unmistakable. Challenge certain orthodoxies and you risk your career. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. And that means it's probably important. Recent reef monitoring has recorded periods of strong coral cover in parts of the Great Barrier Reef. Some analysts suggest that in certain regions, coral cover has rebounded substantially compared to the early 2010s. Other researchers caution that species mix, bleaching susceptibility and cyclone risk still matter. Well, both things can be true, rebound in measured cover and ongoing vulnerability. But notice how this nuance plays in public debate. If you emphasise recovery, you're accused of denial. If you emphasise risk, you're accused of doom-mongering. The solution to that impasse is more debate, not less, more data, not fewer voices. Some will remember the Gillard-era push for tighter media oversight after the Finkelstein report, an initiative that sparked its own national argument about press freedom and state power. Fast forward a decade, and we find ourselves revisiting the same dynamic under a new banner: misinformation and disinformation. The pitch is familiar, or we're only going after the harmful stuff. But the practice is far more sweeping. A mechanism that can quietly redraw the Overton window and relabel heterodox science or policy criticism as socially unacceptable. Well, it doesn't have to be totalised to be corrosive. a little chill on speech goes a long way, especially in universities, newsrooms, and public institutions where reputations and grants hang in the balance. Look abroad. Europe and the UK have been living with the real-world costs of energy transitions, shaped more by aspiration than engineering. Households struggle with energy bills. Industrial competitiveness has wobbled. In Germany, parts of the energy and auto sectors are reassessing pace and feasibility. In Britain, political support for aggressive timelines has softened under the weight of affordability. And in the United States, there's periodic talk in policy circles about revisiting the assumptions behind federal climate rules, even as legal frameworks remain in force. The larger point isn't that one side has the truth, it's that reality is testing narratives on reliability, cost, grid stability, permitting timelines, mineral supply chains, and consumer tolerance. Complex systems don't yield to slogans. They demand trade-offs, transparent, debated, and revisable. Back home, the temperature is rising, not just in climate models, but in politics. At CPAC Brisbane, a cohort of Liberal and National MPs and senators spoke openly about abandoning net zero targets as currently configured. Whether you applaud that or oppose it, it signals a realignment. The political cost-benefit math is shifting. Australians are asking brass tacks questions. What will this cost my family? Will the lights stay on? Can our industries compete? Who profits from the mandates and who pays? When the public starts asking those questions at scale, the debate gets healthier or the gatekeepers get louder. Which brings us back to misinformation laws. If your argument is strong, you don't need to police speech. You win on evidence, performance, and outcomes. If you find yourself tightening the screws on what can be said, then you're losing the argument and trying to win the silence. Let's revisit the Great Barrier Reef because it's become a symbol, some say a cudgel. In certain recent survey periods, measured coral cover in parts of the reef has been reported at multi-decade highs compared with earlier baselines, including the early 2010s. That's a very big deal. It demolishes the climate catastrophists' hysteria that the reef is in unrelenting decline. Well, demonstrably it isn't. But nuance matters. Coral systems are dynamic. Gains can be fragile. Species composition can shift. Heat stress and cyclones still threaten. Responsible reporting can be paradoxical. The reef has seen substantial recovery in parts of the system, yet it remains ecologically vulnerable. Now that's not denial, it's complexity. When institutions refuse to let that complexity breathe, preferring a single politically useful narrative, public trust evaporates, people sense spin, and once trust breaks, it's hard to fix. Here's my read. Attempts to criminalise or administratively muzzle contested claims, especially on climate, will continue to misfire. The internet routes around speech blockades. Independent researchers publish. Journalists, or at least some of them, rediscover curiosity, maybe even investigative integrity. And voters recalibrate when bills arrive and grandiose promises collide with reality. If any Australian party offers a credible alternative on net zero, credible meaning numbers that add up, engineering that works, and a common sense pathway that protects households and industry, that platform will win hands down, simply because the wider community values honesty, affordability, and reliability, and that's the heart of it. The public will accept a lot. Costs, change, trade-offs, if they believe they're being told the truth and allowed to hear all sides of it. The surest way to convince people you're hiding something is to punish those who ask the wrong questions. Free societies don't fear debate, they demand it. If the only way for the treasonous Human Rights Commission to prevail is to redefine dissent as harm. That's not scientific, it's dictatorship. And politics, unlike physics, always meets its reckoning. If this episode challenged you, well, that's a good thing. Go read the studies, examine the data, watch the brilliant CDN YouTube channel, and present a counterpoint. That's how truth survives globalism's despotic censors and ultimately triumphs over emotive triggering and NLP-contrived sloganeering. Thank you for watching.